Heck, go on right now and go on Podcastic on Facebook and like Podcastic page. Okay, as well as Let's Talk Sex page. Okay, so today it's sort of like a redo or do over type of show. I have a very special guest that I attempted to bring on in one of my earlier episodes, but due to some, technical difficulties that we had to work out, I am bringing him back this week. And his name is Michael Castleman. And he is a journalist. And he also has a book out. He's an author, sexologist, a book out called Sizzling Sex for Life. Welcome, Michael. How are you?
I'm delighted to be here, Phoenix. Very happy to be here with you today.
I am so happy. I'm so glad that we were able to revisit this subject. And we're going to be talking about your book primarily, how it came to be, and your background and things of that nature. This book, for me, kind of reads as a textbook about sex and the subjects of sex and just different aspects of sex at different ages, and it's just a conglomerate of information. Why don't you tell my viewers how you came to be, and how this book came to be, a little bit about your background and what inspired you to write this book?
I'd be happy to. I've been writing about sexuality now for 46 years.
Wow.
And I started writing about it in Ann Arbor, Michigan, of all places. Uh, and I, I approached it reluctantly. I was writing about health at the time in my early 20s. I was writing health articles for a community newspaper. And for Valentine's Day, the editor said, "Mike, we need something for Valentine's Day. I want you to write a story called How to Make Love."
Mm.
And I said, "Absolutely not. I, I'm 23 years old. What do I know?" And he said, "Well, but you live with your girlfriend, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, but that doesn't mean I know anything about sex. I'm like everybody else. I don't know much about it. I just do it."
Right.
And
Exa-
so he cajoled me,
mhm.
and I still said no. And then I left the office and I walked home. My house is about 10-minute walk away from the newspaper office. And when I got home, my girlfriend said to me, "What do you mean you won't write this article about sex? You got to do this." The editor had called her up and said, "You got to convince him." So I said, "All right, I'll give it a whirl."
Mhm.
And I started researching sexuality this is the early 1970s, and I found it to be quite fascinating. And I wrote that article, and I really enjoyed writing about it. And people came up to me on the street saying, "Hey, thanks for that article. That had never happened before." And I've just been writing about sexuality and sex research and sex problems and
Mm.
how to enhance lovemaking ever since. And that's eventually what led to Sizzling Sex, which is my third sex guide. And it's by far the most comprehensive. The Sizzling Sex is a cradle to grave book. So it's got everything from the sexual implications of circumcision
Mhm.
to the growing phenomenon of sex in nursing homes and everything in between, good, bad, and ugly, how to enhance your lovemaking, how to deal with
Sex and
sex
nursing
problems, and
homes.
how
I'm
to
sorry.
recover from sexual trauma is a very important part of the book. How to
Mm.
recover from childhood sex abuse and how to recover from sexual assault and harassment, because sex has downsides as well as upsides.
Right.
And Sizzling Sex for Life really tries to address all of them succinctly. And
Mhm.
yes, you're right, it does have a feel of a kind of a textbook, but I hope it's not as dry as a textbook. I mean, there's a lot of jokes in there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I tried to make it as entertaining as I could.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to just any of my viewers, if you have a question, this would be the moment that you would call us and present those questions to Mike. And I'm almost certain that he will have an answer for you. The number is 248-854-9850. Again, call in if you have any questions, any comments, if you want to know where to purchase the book, how to obtain information. We're going to be talking about some of the chapters, titles, and some of the content of the book. And actually, you said something that kind of interests me. So, I'm a career, you know, uh, single, in my opinion. And I'm almost convinced, Mike, that I'm probably going to go to my grave as single woman, but sexual, you know. And this is just this is how I envision, me checking out is, I'm going to still be heightened sexually, still very much sexually active, hopefully with a companion, that is, going to be there. And maybe a younger companion, or if I could, find somebody who is my age at that point that's very just as sexual as I am. You said something, sex in nursing homes. Let's talk about that. And because, my mother she's not in a nursing home, but she's in an assisted community living. Okay. And everybody makes a certain assumption that once you reach a certain age, your libido is low and, you're not as sexually active. But I'm finding for like me, and, my female friends alike, that we tend to be more sexual now. And, what is your experience on that subject matter, sex and age, and also touch on the aspect of, the senior living care facilities. I know I've heard stories, but I'm not that versed on what actually is going on. Now that my mom is in a senior assisted living community, I'm more interested in knowing.
Well, sure. First of all, I'd like to say that as far as I can tell, you're a very sexual person because I've read some of your erotic poetry and I think it's damn good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Then, yes, there's a whole chapter in Sizzling Sex for Life called You're Never Too Old for Sizzling Sex. Mm-hmm. And it's a tremendous and very cruel myth that people age out of sexuality.
Yeah.
You don't. People are sexual for life. Now, many people, because of illness and disability, or they're by themselves or whatever, they decide to stop being sexual. That's a decision that you can make at any age.
Right.
But most people who are older adults in later life, the surveys are very consistent that they consider themselves sexual, they want to remain sexual, and if they have partners, they are sexual. And even if they don't have partners, they're sexual. I mean, the most popular form of sex on earth is self-pleasuring, solo sex. And more than half the women in the United States, more than half the adult women own at least one vibrator, and that includes a whole lot of elderly women. And I say more power to them. I say more power to them. Wear that thing out. So the people who are older, mm-hmm. Sex changes for older people. Older men, the vast majority, about 90%, eventually lose their erections. Okay. And older women suffer postmenopausal vaginal dryness and vaginal atrophy that can make intercourse uncomfortable. And so most older people, after about in the 50s and 60s, people who have partners generally stop having vaginal intercourse. And they have what sexologists call outer course, everything but. Intercourse becomes problematic. The guy can't get it up and the woman doesn't feel receptive. So that's when kissing and cuddling and hugging and mutual massage and hand jobs and oral sex and maybe some anal play, maybe a little kink. People become a little more experimental often when intercourse drops out of the picture, that closes the door for some people, but it opens new doors for others. And in Sizzling Sex for Life, I encourage people who are older to see aging as an opportunity for new sexual play and new ways to find sexual fulfillment.
So what are you mentioned kink? Can you elaborate on what that is? Because a lot of people may be doing it, but not know exactly what term to apply to it. So when you say kink, like we know oral sex, and we know that you kind of readjust. I'm 51, by the way, and I don't, you know, I if I had a in home partner, he would probably be wore out, like literally, like, get me away from this woman, what's going on here, unless he allows me to have a younger boyfriend, but I doubt he would allow that. So explain to me, and to the viewers, what kink really means, because I don't think a lot of people are versed in knowing what that term means
Well,
specifically.
kink is a very general term for sex that is generally considered unconventional. So it's not
Okay.
kissing, cuddling, vaginal intercourse, hand jobs. It's everything else. So it
Okay.
includes things like blindfolds,
Mm.
spanking, a little hair
Mm.
pulling, uh,
Mm.
role playing, where you're the doctor, I'm the patient kind of thing, or
Oh,
I'm
I
I'm the
like kink.
boss and you're the employee, and where there's giving and receiving of commands.
Hmm.
And then all of the aspects of BDSM, bondage, discipline, and sadomasochism, are all part of kink.
Okay.
And the thing about kink is it's a lot more popular than most people think.
Right.
Plenty of people who are sexually conservative use blindfolds. Blindfolds are amazingly erotic devices
Yeah.
because they allow the blindfold wearer to get into their own feelings and not be distracted by sight. And spanking, very popular. Now, I am not talking about beating people up. I'm not
Right.
talking about violence. I am talking about situations where the recipient is always in control through the use of safe words.
Hmm.
So if you are, and the safe words that I recommend are yellow light if people are a little bit nervous, and red light if people want to say stop. Because you
Yeah.
don't want to have the word stop be your signal, because a lot of people like to hear the recipient saying stop, 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 and
Right.
knowing that you don't have to.
Right.
So with specific stop and caution signals, the submissive, the person who is being done to, is always in complete control.
Hmm.
And so kink and BDSM are kind of ironic because it looks like the person who's doing the spanking is in control, when actually the person being spanked is always totally in control. And it
Could you say
allows
it
people to
again, Mike?
play
Could you
with
say it
different
again? I
roles.
keep telling these people, could you say it again?
All right, so spanking is very popular. In fact, about a third, the best surveys I've seen is that about a third of American lovers
Hmm.
have at least tried erotic spanking. And it can be very sensation heightening. It can be a lot of fun. And uh, check it out.
Yeah. 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 I'm all for and uninhibitedness, and it's whatever you and your partner agree upon, whatever you and your partner are comfortable with. Um, and no time should I think one partner should force another partner into doing something that they don't agree to or they're not comfortable with, or maybe even over time they may get comfortable with it. You know, what do you perceive as being probably in a person's lifespan? What would be their most enjoyable time of life? Because, and I'm asking you this because, you know, not to put my grandson on front, he's a baby. At what do you perceive maybe the earliest that a person experience maybe sexual, um not, I don't want to say desires, but urges. They might not know what they are, but that experience or that sensation is present in their bodies. Like, have you ever did any research or found out what that
Yes.
would be?
Yes, there's actually there's a famous study of that where videos,
Mm.
ultrasound videos, were taken of babies in the womb,
In the
fetuses,
womb. Wow.
and the genitals develop in the third trimester.
Mm-hmm.
And these ultrasound videos clearly show little hands in the
Mm-hmm.
womb stroking little genitals.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we're sexual before we're born.
Wow.
And people are sexual throughout their entire lives, from infancy to old age.
Mm-hmm.
Society and our laws say it's only a quote unquote appropriate to be sexual in certain ways at certain times. But, toddlers touch themselves all over. And
Yeah.
children are enthusiastic self pleasurers until adults tell them not to,
Right.
or at least tell them to do it in private.
Right.
So, and there's no different people have different rhythms. Some people are sexually wild in their teen years, in their 20s, and then later in life become very conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are very nervous about sex in their teens and 20s, are not very sexually active when they're young. And then all of a sudden at 50, 60, something happens, they're in a new relationship, and all of a sudden they experience a whole new erotic blossoming in their lives. There is only one universally valid sexual generalization, and that is that everyone is sexually unique. You can't, there are things that are more common than others, but everybody is sexually unique. Our sexuality is as individual as our DNA. And it's part of who we are. And one of the wonderful things about life is that it affords an opportunity to discover who you are sexually and enjoy it.
Yeah. Sexual freedom. I wanted to ask you too, some of the sexual stereotypes or theories that are out there, that certain foods make you horny. I've been told oysters. I've been told black licorice. I've been
Yeah.
told just certain foods. Do you believe these things to be true, or is this just people hyping up those things, and is that actually true? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Well, yes and no. Yes, in the case of oysters, for example, oysters are unusually rich in the mineral zinc.
Mm.
And zinc is a mineral that is critical to male sexual functioning.
Oh,
So you can make a
okay.
case that men who eat a lot of oysters, they're going to get more zinc and maybe they're going to be more functional sexually. But there's
Mm.
a larger truth here, and that is that sex is very open to suggestion. And if you say to somebody, hey, applesauce is really great for sex, all of a sudden, people are eating applesauce and saying it's great.
Hmm.
There's in folklore, there are all kinds of things that have been hyped as being sexual stimulants, and sometimes they actually are. But anything that you suggest is sexual can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think one of the most interesting cases of a plant that actually does have sexual impact is that in West Africa, there is a tree called the Ohimbi tree,
Mm.
and it had a
I need to write that
reputation
down.
for centuries among West Africans as being an erection aid.
Mm.
That guys who drank tea made with the bark of this tree, would keep it up and get harder. Well, it turns out that yohimbe bark does contain a compound called yohimbine that is an FDA-approved erection medication. So
Really?
sometimes these folkloric things turn out to be quite true. But like I said, sex is very open to suggestion. And
Mm.
so anybody who hypes anything can convince somebody that it works.
Okay. Okay. With that being said, would you agree that some things, um, sex happens in the mind, and I've been told this, sex happen in the mind before it happens in the body, in the you know.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you.
Okay.
You've heard many times that the sexiest organ is the brain.
Mhm.
Sex is really a mind-body experience. You think about it in your mind and you start feeling it in your body.
Mhm.
But if someone lays a pair of warm hands on your shoulders or your face or your head or whatever, you can start feeling it first and then think, "Oh, wow, I'm getting turned on." So
Mhm.
it's a two-way street. Sometimes the mind what is what is in the lead, and sometimes it's the body. And usually, when sex is best, it's a clear combination of the two. You're engaged in mutual whole body touch and massage that is very arousing and turns people on. And you're also breathing more deeply, which calms the nervous system and allows for erotic excitement to develop.
Okay.
Sex is really, in some ways, a special kind of meditation where you tune in to yourself and to your partner if you have one, and one thing leads to another.
Okay. Okay, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. I want to talk a little bit about, because I do know that there's a chapter in the book that deals with sexual trauma. And I am a survivor. And also, I've been told that my sexual behavior, and people label you as such based on what they think your experiences have been. Um, but I also know that victims of sexual trauma can go either way on the spectrum. They can
Right.
either be, you know, totally adverse to sexuality, or they can be drawn to it. Um,
Right.
what is your take on the subject of sexual trauma and how it happens and manifests when somebody experiences it? The things that the aftermath of being going through sexual trauma, and then too, some victims also experience layers of sexual trauma over the course of their lives. Um,
Well, what you said is absolutely true. Some people who are survivors of sexual trauma completely turn off to sex for the rest of their lives and
mm,
can't deal with it.
mm-hmm,
Other people who are survivors of sexual trauma become hypersexual and for whatever reason like lots of sex. This goes back to what I said initially, that everyone's sexually unique and you can't really generalize. But the generalization that you can make is that if people are survivors of sexual trauma and they want to be sexual by themselves or with partners, they can be, and you can recover from sexual trauma. You never, traumatic incidents in your life, whether they're sexual or not, you never get past them in some ways because they're part of your life. They happen to you.
mm-hmm,
But you can get past them paralyzing you, and you can get past uh, any sexual aversion. And in the case of childhood sex abuse, the best way to get past it is with professional therapy. That seems to be very key to being happily sexual with a history of childhood sex abuse. In the case of sexual assault, it's similar. You need someone to talk to, and that can be a partner, that can be family, it can be friends, it can be a professional. But if you are committed to being sexual and remaining sexual, sexual trauma does not prevent that. It complicates it a little bit for a while. It
mm-hmm.
can complicate it quite a bit for a while. But eventually you can work through it. And I've talked to many survivors of childhood sex abuse who have wonderful sex lives, and in part because they spend so much time working on who they are sexually, talking about it with their lovers. And a lot of sexual intimacy really is about conversation, revealing yourself to your partner in words, not just in massage and sexual play, but talking about it. And so when people really talk about it and delve into it, uh, I'm not going to be some kind of Pollyanna who says that all sexual trauma can be resolved, but I will say that the research is very clear that in the large majority of cases, people who address sexual trauma seriously, who seek therapy, and who are committed to recovering and having good sex lives can have them.
That's true. I agree. I agree. I agree. So sexual trauma, because some victims go through the shaming um, period for a very long time, and because at some point they don't know how to explain their behavior, um, and society's stigma though has caused a lot of victims to react to their behavior in that manner, because it's looked down upon. It's and with a lot of things that's going on now with the and I hate to call it this, you know, the Me Too movement and all of that stuff, but society has placed stigmas on sexuality, period. And when you're a victim of sexual trauma, it makes it even worse. Those stigmas makes it even worse for a lot of victims. Um, how do you perceive going forward, um, for anyone who has been sexually traumatized, um, and deal with society and the stigmas that's going on? How would you recommend that they move forward in their lives when it comes down to that?
I would urge them to, first of all, understand that they can get past it, that it doesn't have to paralyze them for life. That's number one. Number two is they need to decide what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage them to talk to people who they're close to. So talk to their families, clergy people, doctors, social workers, and get referred into a network of people who deal with this professionally. And I would include support groups in that. Support groups can be very helpful for survivors of child sex abuse and sexual assault. Um, and then follow through with it. The It can be very painful to work on recovery, particularly from childhood sex abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But the work is worth it. It's worth it because you come out the other end of the tunnel feeling much more integrity as a person, feeling more dignified, feeling less stigmatized. And as far as stigma goes, our society can be extremely cruel to people who are sexual and gender minorities. So if you're a gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual, intersexual, gender, non-binary, transgender, all of these sexual and gender minorities, people in those groups have almost universally been subjected to stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And the one important way to get it, now on an individual level, people have to make their own decisions.
Right.
But on a social level, at the level of society, people should come out and say, yes, I'm bisexual. Yes, I'm gendered non-binary. I'm queer. I'm gay.
Yep.
Because the more that people talk about it, the more that other people see that their brother, their sister, their neighbor, their classmate are in a gender minority or a sexual minority, and it becomes normalized. It's when people are silent that the stigma grows. When
Yeah.
people talk about it and come out, as the phrase is among LGBT people, when you come out, you discover that number one, there's a whole lot of people like you, and number two, you show your family and your friends and your coworkers and your classmates that they know somebody who's in a gender minority or sexual minority, and it's a normal thing. It's fine.
Right. Right. Especially now that a lot of legislation is in support of the LBGT community. Um, One of the major, a landmark actually uh, legislation that's passed in the Supreme Court, um, that they're protected now. They're considered a protected class. Um, and I agree with you. A lot of acceptance, or whether you agree with it or not, it's here. Whether you agree, sexual trauma happens to people. Um, People aren't the same as you might think. They're in these gender um, mixed gender roles. So I agree wholeheartedly that the more it's talked about, the more it's accepted. I would like to see um, people be more sexually free in a healthy manner. I'm not talking about sexual deviance. I'm talking about being able to accept who you are sexually. And that's not happening fast enough for me, actually. Um, but also, I wanted to touch on our our group of young people, the millennials. And I always refer to them as the millennials because, I have a group of millennials at home and I try to understand them. And, their whole perspective is so different from mine and, how I was raised and, you know, their whole perspective on the subject matter of sexuality is just so different. Um, and in my opinion, they may be a little more freer than how my generation grew up. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, it's fascinating that you say that because, on the one hand, in every generation, the older generation always thinks the younger generation is sexually out of control, very conveniently forgetting how they behaved when they were in their
Right.
teens and 20s. But if you look at the data, and there's a tremendous amount of research on this, it turns out that today's teens and young adults are actually less sexual than teens and young adults were when you, Phoenix, were a kid, when I'm 70.
Wow.
And
Really?
uh, today's teens are less sexually active. And if they are sexually active, they are more likely to use contraception. And so the rate of unplanned pregnancies is way down.
Yeah.
And that's particularly true in the African American community. Condoms are actually pretty popular among young people. They continue to get bad press, but young people, the rate of unplanned pregnancies is down 70%. Let me be specific.
Mm-hmm.
The teen birth rate has fallen 70% since 1990. So that's in the
Wow.
last 30 years. The teen birth rate is down by more than 2/3. And
That's
so
a big.
young people are perfectly capable
Mm-hmm.
of being sexually irresponsible. But the fact is, most of them are more sexually responsible than my generation was in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the reasons is that, as reluctant as many parents are to talk about sex with their kids, they're forced to now in ways that they weren't because sex is in the news. I mean,
Right.
in the 1960s, I didn't open up a newspaper and see articles about sex. Nobody did. And
No.
so there was nothing to talk about with my parents. Nowadays, you open up a newspaper or get on a podcast or TV show. It's about sexual and gender minorities. It's about sexual trauma. It's about sexual harassment, the Me Too movement.
Mm-hmm.
All of this triggers a great deal of discussion in families. And what young people want is to be taken seriously as sexual people. And
Yes.
so when parents say, "Oh, don't talk about that. That's not important to you," then young people feel denied.
Yeah.
But when parents say, "Hey, I know you're sexual, and you're living and you're coping in a world that's very sexualized, and I'm concerned about that, and let's talk about what you're going to
Let's talk.
do."
Yes. Let's talk.
And that helps when kids feel recognized, when they feel acknowledged as sexual beings. They don't have to go out and prove it by getting pregnant.
Right. There you have it. There you have it. Mike, I'm going to allow you the floor to talk about the book, where it can be purchased. I'm telling you guys, this book is for everyone of all ages. Like I said, it is a manual, and I'm so glad that I met you, Mike. I'm so glad that had an opportunity to talk with you, and I'm hoping and praying that this relationship that we have continue on for years to come, because I have plenty of questions and things that I would love to talk to you about. But tell us where they can purchase this book and some of the other literature that you have out, because you are a journalist.
Yes.
And if you have any upcoming events or anything, I would love to bring you here to actually have you speak,
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on, Phoenix. You are a charming interviewer and a very desirable, sexy gal. So I'm a lucky guy here.
Stop. Stop it.
Sizzling Sex for Life is available at booksellers everywhere. It's on Amazon. And I hope you check it out. Just go to the page and see what people think of it. It's been very well received by people in the sex field, and I'm very gratified about that. I also operate a website called GreatSexGuidance.com, where I answer sex questions for free. So if you have any sex question about anything, you can ask me on GreatSexGuidance.com, and I will either answer the question for you, or if I don't know the answer, I will research it, or I will refer you out to someone who can. So like, I'm not a doctor, and there are a lot of sex questions that have medical elements. And fortunately, there's the Society for Sexual Medicine that can answer those questions. But I'm here to answer people's questions, and I've answered more than 12,000 sex questions over the years, and a lot of them inform the content of Sizzling Sex for Life, because I wanted to write about what people actually care about.
Right.
And there's no better way to figure out what people care about than to answer thousands and thousands of questions. You get an interesting perspective on the sex issues that bother people.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Mike. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show, on the podcast. And hopefully I'll be able to have you come on again and talk again with us. Everyone, this has been a joyous episode for me. My guest, Michael Castleman. Thank you for coming on the show. And this is your girl, Phoenix. Let's talk sex. I'll see you again next week, 6 p.m. Wednesday, same time. Love you guys. Mwah. Bye.